everyone! Welcome to the live video round 2. I went live before, but I think I have my phone upside down or something. So, anyway, welcome. I'm going to be talking about technique tips for clarinet and saxophone. Amanda did a really great video about flute tips last week, so be sure to check that out if you haven't seen it. I just got back from this weekend. Actually, until yesterday, I was in the recording studio recording my jazz album of my original tunes. So it's been a long weekend, but it was really awesome, and I'm really excited to be back making some live videos. So if you're watching this live, say hi in the chat, what instrument you play and where you're from if you want. But I'm just going to dive right into it. So basically today, I'm just going to be talking about some tips for being able to improve your technique and play faster, since that's something I've gotten a lot of questions about in my email. And I know that we had one person ask about some recording tips. And I think I'll probably do that in a future video because there's a lot of stuff I could do. So if you're interested in recording for clarinet and sax, let me know, specifically like recording at home or recording in a studio, and I can definitely talk about some of that stuff in an upcoming video. Okay, so let's get into it. I got my clarinet and saxophone today. So let's talk about what you need to play to have better technique and play faster. So I'll try to demonstrate on both instruments. So this is going to be really similar to Amanda's video. So I think before I kind of talked a little bit about how I divide my practice session. So first of all, it's really important to kind of have kind of a practice plan, even if you don't have that much time. So I usually divide my practice into a combination of warm-ups, techniques, and then repertoire I'm working on. And I adjust that kind of depending on how much time I have. So anyway, a big part of my practice is working on technique. So every time I'm practicing, I'm doing scales. And yes, I know scales can be boring and we don't like them, but unfortunately, we do have to practice them in order to play the more fun stuff. There's kind of no way around it. So typically, what I see a lot with my students and myself too is we'll practice stuff that's easy and that sounds really good. So we'll be working on our C major scale, or just, our scales that sound like they're the easiest and most fun to play. And that, do that for a couple minutes and that's it. So we need to play stuff that is really challenging us, and that's usually branching into harder keys. So when I'm practicing, I'm going around either chromatically or in the circle of fifths, doing my major and minor scales, so that doesn't take me very long. And I don't do all of my scales every day. I make sure to work on stuff that's really challenging. So for example, I usually do a close scale exercise. So that's a method that has the scales in 12 keys. And I just kind of go around that. So that was C major, then A minor. And that's kind of now what I do for warm up. But when I was just starting, I'd make sure that I'd look at my 12 major scales and be okay, I know C, G, F, and then I'd move on to some of the harder ones that have more sharps and flats. So just really making sure to do those and doing them with a metronome. So it's okay to sound bad in the practice room and being working on stuff that is challenging you. That means that you're getting better. Okay, so making sure to do scales, and rather than just working scales up and down, there's a few different ways to practice them. So you can make sure that you're doing scales full range. So that means instead of just playing it in an octave, if you're doing C major, 1 octave, you can do it, you can start your C major scale on the lowest note of your instrument and then end on a pretty high note. So let's say I have my saxophone now. Okay, I was just playing a bunch of clarinet. So okay, let's say I want to do my C major scale on saxophone. So maybe I'll start on my low B, right? Because that's in C. Sorry, my reed is moving around a little bit. If you can't tell, my embouchure's a little bit tired from recording an album all weekend, so sorry about that. Um, so that can be a way to practice the scale rather than, just the one octave. Also, you can do different intervals. So sometimes in music, like for example, Mozart Clarinet Concerto, we have a lot of thirds, right? The interval of a third. It's not just moving straight through the scale. So you can practice your scales in thirds or fourths or fifths. So an example of a scale in thirds would be like. So that's some intervals that you'll see in music, especially like if you have any challenging band music or music in, some different ensembles or anything like that. Okay, so that's kind of scale practice. And you totally don't have to do like hours and hours of scales. You can just do a couple of those things and just make sure that you're challenging yourself on working on stuff that's difficult for you. And especially in jazz, there's so many different scales that we can work on. So I'll like pick a scale to work on. Like maybe I want to work on my diminished whole tone scale for one day, and that'll kind of be the scale I practice. As long as you're challenging yourself and trying to hit it when you're practicing your instruments, you will be improving. So the other thing about technique is you want to make sure that your finger position and what you're doing on your instrument is good, right? Like you don't want your hands wildly flying off the keys or doing weird stuff. So you want to be keeping your fingers pretty close to the keys so that they're ready to play that note. You don't want your fingers to be too tense or like flat. If I'm playing like this, it's going to be hard to move my fingers fast. We can be especially guilty of this on clarinet because we have these we're putting our fingers on the holes on saxophone. We have these keys are closed, so we have open holes on the clarinet. So we really need to make sure that we're putting our full pad of the finger on those keys, and not like doing anything like this with our hands where they're not correctly on the keys there. So I use a mirror to practice a lot. Like you can either just set up your cell phone camera, or just like sometimes I'll just practice, like find a mirror and practice next to it just to make sure that my fingers aren't doing anything crazy. Okay, let's see what else. You can also have like specific finger exercises that you do. So sometimes with my students, when we're working on like making sure that we're covering all the holes on the clarinet, you can do like an exercise. So I start like on my E. And I'm kind of just adding a finger each time. Let's see, what else about technique? So in addition to practicing your scales, we also want to practice articulation. So let's go back to just our plain old C major scale. So something I'll want to practice is, because I'll usually have to practice music that will have articulation in it. Sometimes a lot of my students will, something that we're all trying to work on is how to get that nice, clean, light articulation instead of kind of tubby sounding articulation that might sound something like this. If it feels like you're getting stuck. So something that I'll make sure is a lot of people, there can be a couple things that are going on. And I'm not going to be able to completely diagnose it over Facebook Live. But I can tell you that sometimes that you might perceive as an articulation problem could actually be a finger problem if your fingers are not moving fast enough. So if something is articulated in my music, I make sure to practice it slurred. So let's say I have a C major articulated scale in like a piece that I'm doing. I'm going to slow it down and practice it slurred first to make sure that my fingers are moving at the right speed. Because the fingers always need to be anticipating the next note. So if they're moving too slow and not being completely coordinated with the tongue, that can lead to some weird problems with articulation that might not even be articulation related. It might be the finger. So that's something that I actually, kind of thought about more in college. I'd always just be like, oh, my tongue's not fast enough. I'm gonna just keep doing it till I get it, but my fingers weren't actually moving. Okay, so that's just kind of some of the technique stuff that I work out in my practice. I know I kind of gave you a lot to think about. That's something that in Woodwind Academy we have an effective practice strategy month, so we create some personalized practice plans and kind of work individually with you to make sure that your practice session is productive. And like Amanda and I always try to spend less time in the practice room and more time like out doing stuff. So just trying to work smarter with your practice routine and just kind of really making it, less complicated. So I hope some of those suggestions were helpful. Let me know if you try any of them out, how it went for you, and we'll see you on the next live. Thanks for watching, everybody.